So, 2018, like any other year, I suppose, has been marked by many significant anniversaries. The centennial of the end of the First World War, and the centennial of the establishment of the First Republic of Armenia, the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first Armenian known to have set foot in North America. But it is also the 30th anniversary of two watershed events in modern Armenian history. The bursting onto the scene in early 1988 of the Karabakh movement and the catastrophic earthquake of December 1988. Each event in its way riveted the attention of Armenians and the world on a place that certainly most of the world and arguably many Armenians had never paid much attention to, Soviet Armenia. 1988 changed everything. The Karabakh movement saw Armenians pushing at the limits of Gorbachev's policy of glasnost to assert their rights and to address historical and current-day injustices. In this, Armenia was in the vanguard of the process that would bring an end to the Soviet Union just 3 years later. The earthquake and its utter devastation and tragic loss of life led to a relief effort led by Armenians around the world, the like of which had not been seen arguably since the aftermath of the Armenian genocide, when a very different Armenian diaspora strove to aid the survivors. And after the earthquake, the relationship between Armenia and the diaspora as a whole was changed forever. Before we hear about the rescue effort, we felt it was important to remember the human toll of the earthquake. So we're going to watch two videos, a short video from ABC News from 1988 reporting on the earthquake as it happened in real time. And the second is a powerful interview done by Steve Kirkjian a few weeks ago with Dr. Haik Demoyan, the longtime director of the Armenian Genocide Museum in Yerevan and a native of Gyumri, then Leningrad, who experienced the earthquake as a teenager and who has very powerful reminiscences of what he experienced at the time. So I will dim the lights.
Haik Demoyan, who's here with us today, is going to talk to us a little bit, or somewhat, about the experiences that he had as a 13-year-old student in Gyumri, one of the two cities that were most affected by this devastating earthquake. Haik, welcome. We're at the Armenian Library in Watertown. Welcome here, and please tell us, what was the experience like? What time of day was it? And did you have much warning? And what did you do?
Well, being 13 years old, teenage, in a turbulent year of 1988, something changed drastically. Just imagine that you have Brezhnev area while you are kids still entering school. Then you have Gorbachev area, some kind of hope, that expectation that something will change soon. And you feel that in family, you know, talks change, way slightly critics towards Soviet regime downed, and bishop appeared in your house, blessings, ceremonies. You was feeling that something is changing. Then Karabakh movement, 88, another energy, and no one expected something horrible is just behind the door, a natural disaster. Mm-hmm. Although, you know, I remember before that a couple of times ground shake. Mom said, "Okay, this is earthquake. Don't worry." That was something little, something extraordinary, but no one paid attention that something in your life will come and change before and after, making your life before and after, many thousands in that way. Yeah, it was December. I remember we had a guest from Lithuania, a Russian guy. My family, they keep friendly relations. It was an interesting situation with the Soviet Brotherhood of Nations. You just keep contacts with the people in Siberia or Baltic states. A guy visited us, and we also sometimes visited Vilnius, Lithuania. Pure human relations. And we had a problem to find the tickets to fly back, and we did it on December 6th.
No.
Can you imagine? So a day before, we managed to find a ticket, and he flew back to home. And then in the morning or the next day, while your guest gone, the feeling is that a little emptiness. And mom said, "Okay, be careful this day because I had a terrible dream." I remember she said that. And we are not superstitious, but your parent, your mom is saying, with my brother, we were in the same class. I'm older. And we took a walk, no bus, no trolley bus, nothing, just a 15 minutes walk towards the school. We were late, actually, I remember that. It was a class for mathematics. I remember well every detail. We opened the window, I don't know why, that day, and a strange smoke came in. It was a smoke, not the smoke, but a smoke, just a hazy
Fog?
fog. Yes, as fog entered in the room. The next classes, which is just 40 minutes before the earthquake started, it was a class to educate boys how to make wooden stuff, metal stuff, and the girls were for the girls were separate classes for knitting and preparing, cooking, etc. We were making hammers, so it was half done hammer. I started to use instruments to polish, and a couple of seconds before the first shake started, I went to the teacher asking another instrument for a different angle. And I said, I finished this part, I need that one. And then when I approached, he just turned to take the instrument from his right, and everything started to move and make a huge sound. You can imagine glasses and the all metal instruments inside of that room. So it doubled and tripled the news and effect and the sounds and the effects of this terrible thing which started. Roaring, I remember roaring from the earth. It was like a demon or some huge animal is moving and roaring under the ground. He realized first. We were thinking that the Soviet tanks entered Leningrad because there was a military curfew that time in Yerevan.
Right.
We thought that tanks entered in Leningrad too, because meetings were on in Leningrad, but in Yerevan they were strictly prohibited. There was a military curfew, tanks on the street. But he shouted, "This is Zhashke Pachek," which means Zhashke is a short form of Yegrashash. For local dialects, Zhashke Pachek. Since I was just in front of his desk, I was the closest towards the main entrance to that room. I turned my back to my brother because brother was next to me. I said, "Come," and I hinted, "Come to me, run." I opened the door with kicking the door, and it was a short but very memorable run towards the main entrance. The dangerous thing for Soviet schools is that to keep the glasses intact and secure, they made metal bars outside of all first level windows. So you have no emergency exit. The only exit, you have to go out from the building, from the very place you enter it in. So football players, sporting's outside, in order to keep the glasses intact, they were metal bars. You can even break the window to go out, to save your life during the fire or earthquake. That's why many school children died. And it was a run in a building, when building moved like this, vertically and horizontally. So it was very hard to stand. It was very hard because the strikes and the power of earthquake hit you down, and you are in the air. Building is going down and you are in air. You appear on air. So it's so powerful. And you can imagine that the ground can make in this wave, like a wave, Suddenly I saw a biology teacher screaming, and she was out, and when building turned in that way and at an angle, she went back and door closed. And doubled with terrible noise of panels, all these concrete constructions, metal bars, falling ladders. and of course falling the electricity
Mhm.
stuff, the illuminations. When I was in the second part of the school, there was a new block and the old block. The main entrance was from the old block of the school.
Mhm.
While entering to that old block, I was witnessing how the portraits of Gorbachev or Politburo, communist leadership, the portraits were hanging on the wall. You know, it was a propaganda. You have to see this is Soviet mythology, you
Yes,
know,
right.
date of the Soviet period. Everything is falling down, crushed windows and the torn portraits. It's on the way. You run. Suddenly it stopped when I was out, and I looked at everything is white because of this cements falling
Right,
down.
right.
And I remember director, the head of the school, old guy. Um, he said, "Now it's over. Let's go to the classes." So that's why it was unusual. You know, you should go to the classes
Right.
because it's over, but everything
in
inside
shock.
is smashed.
Yeah.
Everything, glasses broken, you know, partly collapsed. The place I was, it was right in the corner of New Block. And then on the way back home, I turned my back and saw that that part is collapsed.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's you know, it was half ruined, and I left my stuff because I undressed for doing that job.
Your
this
brother
part-
was, how long did it last, and how did your brother make
There
it
were
out?
3 shakes simultaneously with small pause. When I was out, I watched in front of me, it was an 8th-floor building, and someone shouted, "Help, help," and suddenly you see blue sky instead of building, and you never realize that building collapsed. And
Right in
you
front.
never see that building is collapsing just in front of your eyes. It was a one building and the one is 8th floor. Then you see that 8th floor, someone on the upper level is shouting help, and suddenly this building disappears and you can see blue sky and something huge dust.
Oh, my God.
And you never realize that this building collapsed and people died there.
How many people, how many students were in your school?
There were 450 that time. Fortunately, there were no casualties, only one leg broken inside of the school. Those who missed class, a couple of them died in their apartments, blocks. But other schools were really not so lucky. Number 14, number 10, number 2, half of the school children died. And many of them, including my cousins, they were still alive on the second day. You could even speak with them, and unfortunately it was impossible because they were pressed with the blocks, and because of shortage of technical measures to take them down, people worked with the sledgehammers to break and take alive and dead bodies.
I have read that the response by the Soviet civil defense and military was not very powerful, not very effective in getting
Well,
to
first,
those victims.
you never see rescuers, professional rescuers. In the Soviet Union, there was no such meaning and such a body responsible for natural disasters. Only firefighters, okay, but they are not trained for that situation. They have no devices to cut metal bars and take live people. There was no professional team how to rescue. Sometimes you open the concrete block, you see person is alive, everyone is shouting that this kid or that, and suddenly this panel block is collapsing on a live person. Yeah, no one were trained not to go in shaky buildings. Someone tried to save the jewelry, money, or personal stuff, and the aftershocks destroyed that building. Person survived first dangerous part, but died on the second or third day.
When you got home, you made it to your home that
Yeah,
afternoon?
I met my father, who survived by chance. Someone pushed behind him just to run quickly and the first out, but building collapsed that part, and my father survived because he fell down.
He pushed.
Yeah, the guy who pushed, he died, and I saw my father, then mother, because my mother ran to kindergarten to look after my brother, smallest one, and we two brothers, and it was the happiest and tragic moment that you realized your family is secure, so everyone survived. But on the way, you see death everywhere. So next to my school was a print house, number 4, and someone shouted to help with my brother and my father. In the very place where I met my father, we rushed on the ruins, and you see the ruined buildings, metal bars. It's unusual. You see there's no building. It's just ruins. Your eyes are not, accommodated to see the intact building and instead ruins. And the first time I really met that so close, women was smashed completely. You can see bones, you can see part of brain. For 13 years old guy, it's something shocking. But you are like a dream, you're still not realizing that's reality. And she died. We put the body next to the survived wall. And on the second day, you will see many bodies on the street, in houses with the candlelight. But the most striking for me was to see bodies of my cousins with ink, fingers wet with ink. They were school children.
Oh my God.
So you can still see in a coffin.
The ink. Did you become part of any relief effort yourself?
No, my father restricted to see bodies. I was ready to rush to find my uncle's body, family. He died with son and wife, and it was the only building in Leninakan when it was a monolith level. So it's practically impossible to remove. It was like a sandwich, 10 stores. To go in a 6th level, it took 10 days.
To get to the 6th level.
And there was a fire which destroyed bodies. So only way to recognize the body of my cousin was shoes. So there was a fire, and you cannot extinguish.
Did you experience the recovery first from the international units coming in?
Oh
the
yeah,
military
it was late December. I turned back because I stayed 3 days in Leninakan. It was hard evacuation. It took 6-7 hours because there were tracks moving in and cars evacuating children and who survived because there was no electricity, no supplies, nothing. And while in Yerevan, you see the TV, electricity is on, and you see relief efforts. Well, it was kind of inspiring. But you are not alone. You see, tragic news was the collapse of the Yugoslavian plane, which collapsed.
Yes, right.
Just next
Trying to come.
Yeah, Oktemberian just not reaching to Zvartnos because it was full. The airport was full with the planes. They tried to land in an alternative route but collapsed. While this also was something which makes you sad, and you still were waiting that someone survived, even one person, two person. It was on news, until 2 weeks after there were some survivors.
In Gumri, in Leninakan, there were some survivors. 2 weeks later, there were bodies being taken out alive.
Yeah, there were such stories, and it was kind of happy stories,
Yes,
giving you inspiration.
Yeah, sure.
And last This year, actually, I was working on my new book on 14th anniversary of arrival of Armenian in Virginia, book titled Armenian Legacy of America, and I asked permission from AGBU persons to give me permission to check the local archives for any Armenian stuff, American, maybe old photos or documents. And suddenly I found a copybook, large index book, with all names of donators and fundraising index book with names of people whom I know, even they still live. It was a list of Armenians and non-Armenians who gave money for survivors. It was a Massachusetts chapter for Armenian relief.
For the AGBU.
Yeah, it was very sad and also a happy moment because you see how people and non-Armenian church members, foreigners, not usual Armenian surnames with IAN at the end, but you see a lot of foreigners also join to that list.
Being, I wasn't here in Boston, I was in DC then, in Washington, but the front pages of the papers were filled with the response from the Armenian community.
Yeah, I collect everything related to earthquake, so it's part of my identity, is part of my personal history, and one day I hope there will be not a commemorate earthquake but commemorate relief effort, because this is the unprecedented, well, something is compared with the genocide. All the world tried to help, you know, man-made disaster, and again Armenia, nature-made disaster, natural disaster, and again Armenia, all people united to help.
Thank you, Hag. It's informational, but it's also very emotional, and I appreciate you sharing it with us.
Thank you.
So earlier this year, Steve Kirkjian set out to tell the story about the 1988 earthquake relief effort. Not a comprehensive account of the entire process. That is a book that perhaps has yet to be written, and hopefully will be written. Steve? But he did tell an important piece of the story, focused on some of the key Boston area figures who took active roles in this incredible effort. He published his article in the AMAA News magazine under the title, The Untold Story, The Earthquake That Shook Armenia, the Relief Effort That Changed the World, and subsequently also in the Armenian Mirror Spectator. And there are copies of the magazine in the back of the room. So tonight we have Steve with us to lead this discussion. Steve, as you all know, is a longtime investigative reporter for the Boston Globe, a co-founder of the Globe's famed Spotlight team, and he's received 3 Pulitzer Prizes for his reporting. He's also a member of the NAASR Board of Directors, on which he has served since 2003. Steve will engage in conversation tonight with Dr. Caroline Najarian, who is a past president of the Armenian Health Alliance, activist, philanthropist, and author of the wonderful memoir, A Call from Home, Armenia and Karabakh. With Elaine Kasparian, a driving force behind the Armenian Children's Milk Fund, who has also served on the board of directors of the Armenian Missionary Association of America. With Michelle Samorian, a long-serving and current member of the board of directors of the Armenian Missionary Association of America and co-founder of its orphan child care program in Armenia. And he will be joined by John Samorian, past chairman of the board of trustees of our host tonight, the First Armenian Church, and much more, about which we'll hear a little bit later. So, Steve and panelists, please come on.
money, caring anguish that the Armenian community gave to those poor souls who died in that region of, northern region of Armenia. It is, though, an attempt to catch the conversation that went on by hundreds of individuals, many here in Boston, as well as the conversations that went on here among these three women that took place at, I guess it was Carol Ann's house, originally, the night or two after what we saw the ABC report. Carol Ann had been in Armenia and had taken note of and gotten involved, getting more information about the independence drive for Karabakh. So when this struck, because of her enduring care for all things Armenian, and having been to Armenia, people gathered. She called out, and people gathered at her home. Carol Ann, maybe you can just talk a little bit about who was there and what was the shared anguish that you felt.
Good evening, and thank you, Steve, for organizing this, and to NAASR for sponsoring it. At first, when Steve told me about it, I thought, oh, it's 30 years. What is there left to say? We need to know about it. But I think there are some things, not so much to say, but to remember and to remind ourselves what a great community we are. Because we did respond, and we responded with great vigor. We had organized at that time for the independence of Karabakh. Many of us never even knew that there was a place called Karabakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, an enclave of Armenians. So when we found out that these Armenians were being threatened with genocide almost, and what had gone on in Baku and Sumgay, we were horrified, and we organized because we are the survivors of genocide victims. So that morning of this is something that you probably don't know, that morning of the December 7th, George and I had placed an ad in the New York Times for the independence of Karabakh. And the subject of the ad was Gorbachev. And in the ad, it was a full-page ad with his picture, his eyes blocked out, and all of the things that had gone on and what we are asking for. There were supposed to be some other people helping with the payment, but they backed down at the last minute. And we went for it. And that was because Gorbachev, we figured he'd see it because he was in New York at the UN on that day. Well, you can imagine what went through our minds when we woke up that morning and we had a call from Armenia from one of our friends at 7:30 telling us that there had been this massive earthquake. All thoughts of Karabakh at that point, for us anyway, faded to the background. But as you know, not for the people of Gyumri, because when Gorbachev went there a few days later, the very first question he was asked was, and what are you going to do about Karabakh?
I read that, and it was remarkable.
Right.
And he looked at the survivors and the rubble, and I think you'll see there's a photograph of him trying to connect with the people, the Armenian survivors. And the first question he gets is about Karabakh, and he just shakes his head. And he kept shaking his head when he went back to the Politburo to say, that's the greatest disaster, civil disaster we've had in the Soviet Union. And what are they asking about is Karabakh. But you had an immediate crisis to deal with when
Right, and so we were getting together that morning because George Kavarian had a press conference planned about Karabakh that very morning. And of course, everything changed immediately. Audrey Kalic reminded me of that. Everything changed. We gathered at our house and began to say, what are we going to do? Well, it was, what do you call it now? Brownian movement. Everybody was near hysteria. The calls were coming in. Those of us who had contacts in Armenia were hearing firsthand from them what was going on. The need was huge. It was beyond anything that we could have comprehended. How could this happen just the way Haig said? Nobody expected anything like this at this. It was really what you call bad luck. So, and I'm sure practically everybody here remembers that the humanitarian effort then was huge. And it was spearheaded, a lot of it took place here, right here in the Boston area. Immediately, the phone started ringing, offers of help started coming in, and we had to organize as to how are we going to receive all of this assistance. What are we going to do with the money? Who's going to hold the money? That's another story. We won't go into that. I put I want the money back. And all of the logistics that are involved. We could not even stop the phone. The phone would, we put it down and another ring, another call, another this. So we set up, telephone company brought in banks of telephones to our home. And there were a whole group of people. Michelle, Elaine, Audrey, Dr. Betty Gregory, Jasmine Shabanian, Ann Barchanian, who were at our house almost every day, answering phone calls. And not at our house, at their houses. Everybody was working and then getting the information back to us. With that, I want to say that a lot of things from that effort, I'm not going into any of the details, from that effort, a lot of offshoots occurred. The Armenian Children's Milk Fund, the AMAA, the Orphanage Project, the dentists, the doctors, the pharmacists.
Let me break in, Carolyn, if I can, and ask those people who were directly involved in both those efforts, the missionary and the milk fund, to say a little bit about how they got that going. I'm sorry.
Let me just finish this one thought. Ara Demirjian, when I said to him, you went, right? He said, yeah. He said, you don't remember? He said, it's exactly 30 years ago today that you called me and said, well, are you willing to go? Do you have a passport? He said, yes. I said, okay, you're going tomorrow. He said, what do you mean? I said, you're going tomorrow. The next day he was on a plane, and in 36 hours he was in Armenia with a co-worker who was Russian-speaking. Now, he worked for CBS at the time. CBS really didn't want to let him go, but he said, I'm going anyway. And of course, when they came back, realized that it really was to their benefit because they got a lot of publicity.
Terrific. That's a sensational detail. Carolyn. Michelle, can you talk a little bit about the AMAA's response? You were particularly involved with children's supplies, clothes.
Yes, because, is it on? Is this on now? Okay. Actually, the AMAA, whose job it was to bring, can't hear me, right up to my mouth. The AMAA had been, unfortunately, in the business of helping those genocided people since 1915, the war, the genocide. And in its Reverend Moses Jambazian, who was the executive director of the AMAA at the time in New Jersey, notified all of us who were on the board at the time and told us that he was headed for Armenia almost immediately after the earthquake. And he was headed there to assess how we could best help all the victims of this other tragedy. So when he got back, so he went, he assessed, he came back, he called me, and he said, Archigas, I need you and Elizabeth Agbabian on the West Coast. You two need to start an orphan child care program for our organization, because there are more parents left without them. There are more children left than parents to take care of them. So we immediately went to work trying to build an infrastructure so that we could come in and help. So while he was there assessing, we started fundraising. Elizabeth on the West Coast, she was married and is still to one of the foremost seismologists of the United States, Dr. Mirhan Agbabian, who subsequently started the Armenian University of America there. And so she would go to Yerevan and Gyumri and all of the horrible rubble and see firsthand what our committee was committing to do. I was doing fundraisers stateside to raise funds so that we could come to the aid of our children by buying clothing and foodstuffs that we were lucky enough the American government was sending plane loads as fast as we could fill them. So we were in warehouses donated. The New Jersey organization, people organized themselves and gave us empty warehouses. The Hikimian family were wonderful in that sense. And so I checked into the Marriott, and with volunteers from the New Jersey area, Elizabeth came once on the way to Armenia, and we were making packages, which, by the way, were donations in many ways from, say, the Ann and Hope family here, a close friend of John's, who, when I called and said, I need clothing, Sam, I don't know where to go to start finding children's coats, he said, I'm putting in charge a buyer, you tell him what you need, you get it at my cost. And so at that point, I just, from AMAA, from Moses, who was there, and beginning to put a team in Yerevan, we were able to assess how many children, what grades. So from kindergarten up until 14, we made packages of warm clothing, coats, hats, shoes, you name it, by children's ages into packages. And we sent thousands of those to Armenia that terrible winter when they had no heat, no electricity, no way, but they were going to school in some cases. So we had to warm them up, and we did. And this was through the kindness of non-Armenians, through the kindness of Armenians in New Jersey. I didn't know most of them. I had been on the board for 5 years, but they were women from various churches who would come and help me make packages. The warehouses were cold, but nothing like what they were suffering over there. And so we did it. And at the same time, we were building a campaign with the help of a wonderful cousin of John's, Ed Iskandarian, who was head of Arnold Advertising, who met with me with his top people, creators, and we started to blitz in the United States for funds, direct mail approaches, maps of Armenia that asked for funds. The tragedy of Armenia isn't it's the children it left behind type of things that we did. And so we really raised a lot of money that way, because after a while, we had to raise the funds to buy all these goods, because we were taking care of 2 orphanages or supplying diapers and much needed materials for the Mangatun, which was in deplorable state. I don't know if you ever went. Deplorable state. And also the North, which was a better organization, a better institution. But they needed diapers, they needed clothing, they needed everything. So we had to pay for these supplies. And so we started fundraising, and then from there we moved into after-school programs when things started to calm down a bit. Within, a few months, we had people in situ who could oversee distribution of foodstuffs to the families that needed help, and so on. I don't know how much you did.
That's terrific. As far as the outreach that you were able to get, able to connect with over there. Before I ask my cousin Elaine Kasparian to talk about the Milk Fund, one generality that drew out of my research on this was the trust that began to be built up. You heard Haik Demoyan talked about in my interview with him, that the Armenians who had lived under Soviet regime for 70 plus years at that point, were gaining trust from the diaspora and Armenians who did not live under the Soviet rule. And it was only less than 18 months later that Gorbachev, I think responding to the dismay of the Armenians and others, that communism, Soviet rule, just had it caused too much tragedy, too much distress, that he called to the 15 republics and said to them, those of you who want independence, you can vote for independence. And Armenia in September '91, which you all know, was the first republic to vote for independence. And I think it's because of the trust that had begun to be built up in response to the earthquake. So again, not to get too dramatic about it, it's the Armenian spirit that will not just survive, but will turn a tragedy into achievement. And I think it's because of you. We wonder about our grandparents who were able to come to the genocide and settle here, and how they had the pluck and the strength to do it. But it's because of that same strength that you saved a country and made it begin to thrive. So with enough said there, I'll ask my cousin Elaine Kasparian to talk about the wonderful work. Everyone knew about the Milk Fund. It was the lead of every story, or the second paragraph of every story in the Globe, and it wasn't much because of me. It was because of Elaine and her cohorts in reaching out to the papers and the media around the Great Boston to cover this story. Elaine.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming today, and particularly my cousin. Is it all right?
Microphone, please hold the mic.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Now you can hear me. I have to say thank you to my cousin. And thank you for seeing my dear friends again. I hate this. Always have, always will. All right. This is what it's all about. I want to thank all of you for, one, inviting me to come here and giving me the opportunity to remember some of the problems that happened with the Armenian Children's Milk Fund. And I also want to say thank you to all the people who have volunteered and made it happen. It took a whole community to bring out what we were able to accomplish. Sometimes I used to think about this. As it turned out, I want to do a little history first, because there's some people that have to be remembered. Before the earthquake took place, I want you to know that Carol Ann Nigerian and her husband were well involved with keeping the children of Armenia well. And they're the ones who empowered us to move forward and do the work that we were going to do. I'm sorry, I'm not going to use this thing, I hate it. But
No, please do, because otherwise no one can hear you.
So can everybody hear me in there?
No.
Oh, thank you so much. My son is going to help me. I hold it up to my mouth. And I have to say Without Carol Ann, it would have taken months or years to get things launched. She had a core group in place, which was to our advantage, and it was to everybody else's advantage as well. And mainly for the people and the country that we were trying to save. After the earthquake, I couldn't believe how many people came to my community and said, and offered to give me money. What can I do to help? And where can I go? What should I do? Tell me how to be useful. It was Christmas time, and I won't ever forget that because I had a family of my own as well. And I wasn't sure what to do, and you know that. You were there. One of the guys had lots of money, and he came to my house, and he knocked on my door, and he said, listen, my children have everything they need. They don't need this. I'm going to give you this money, and I want you to send it to the children of Armenia. And I said, well, what are you going to do with the kids? He said, don't worry, they get more than enough to take care of them. That's an end. That was the end of that one. And I said, I can't thank you enough. He said, listen, I'm coming back again next week and I'm bringing my friends. What am I supposed to do with the money? I said, well, you can trust me. I will take the money, but I'm going to give it to somebody else. Someone who really knows what to do with it. And I did. Due to the efforts of the Kavarian family, the House Speaker, George Kavarian, and his brother Jack, and his sister-in-law, Dorothy, were there, gave a conference at the State House. Many people came. Many people that were trying to decide what to do, and how to do it, and where to go. And they got some definition of where they could work, how they could help, and what they should do, and an effort to support the Armenian people. And I've got to say, we've got to say, good luck to the Kavarian family, and to George, and to the family who allowed over 200 or 300 people, I believe it was, totally, that came the first time. And they did it a number of times. And that was very important because it brought a group of us together. And it brought other people together and gave them some concept of where to go, how to raise money, where they should send the money, and what should be done first. And thank you, Carol. Thank you. Thank you for bringing and opening the door. I have to give some credit to people that were there. And there were Mayor Menino and the Governor Dukakis. We have to say they were terrific. And there was one other person, I thought you were going to speak about it. Ted Kennedy was wonderful. He opened doors for everybody in the hangars at the airport and allowed us to take what we... I didn't get to it. Oh, I'm sorry. No.
Go ahead, ladies. Go ahead.
I will leave it to her, but I'll tell you, I don't know what we would have done without her.
Teddy will get some shout-outs by a little later, so you go ahead.
Okay, well that's enough. So I just wanted to let you know, we were very fortunate with the people that we had in the state of Massachusetts who were in position to make things happen. We were blessed with great public relations. The two campaign messages, and I'm never going to forget them as long as I live, Dusty Roads and my classmate from Tufts University, time is running out for the children of Armenia, and the other part of it, which all the mothers love, have a heart, show you care. We solidified, we tried to do as much as we could in raising and driving money, and among all the things that we did, we had parties. I think a number of our people that were involved are in this room today, and maybe they'll tell you what they did. We had parties, we had church events, and we had a golf tournament. We did 2 of them, and they brought in more money than anything else we did. So you have to see, we were very successful in raising money, even if it didn't appear that we were going anywhere with it. By 1993, the Milk Fund had contributed more than $66,000 in pounds of milk, soy-based formula, which helped feed thousands of children in Armenia. We were blessed in having Rafi Manjikian, Audrey Kalajian, Karni Gostoyan, Dikran Kazanjian, and Jean Marie Papelian, and I'm sorry, I probably left some of the other names out. Please forgive me if I have. Remember that I love you all, and I'll be happy to list all the names again. Along with many other things, everybody was there to help us. We also supported 2 hospitals. Think about that. Well, a lot of that was Rafi. Yeah, I'll give Rafi credit and then some. He was in Gumri, and then there were others that were in Yerevan. In the first year alone, we raised close to $1 million. I can't even believe it. That was a lot of money. Right, think about it now. It was I don't know how it happened, but it did happen. And it was successful, and we were fortunate. I think there were 3 reasons that our organization was special. At least I feel they were special. And I know for a fact they're special. The Milk Fund involved all different kinds of people. It didn't matter who you were, or what you were, or what you were doing, or what you wanted to be. We cared about whether you were willing to help us in any way, with any of the skills that you had, to support the babies and the mothers in Armenia. We had young and old working together. We brought together young people as well as older people. The young people understood the computers and brought us forward in the 21st century. Think about that, this was 30 years ago. I happen to be 82 right now, and I wasn't very much ahead of the time then. They brought a different order to the group. We started a new tomorrow by involving young people, and I think that that's one of the most important things our community should do. Encourage the young people to take hold of what's going on. We focused on individual people, not on organizations. That was already in place. They were there. If they were interested in being involved to take care of children and mothers, we said, thank you. We do not need to have anything that belongs to somebody else. We tried to make every volunteer feel important. We let them take responsibility, and we listened to what they had to say, and they were pretty intelligent. For me, it was a great time in my life, but it was also very bittersweet because of the tragedy of the earthquake and what it did to the people. The families, the mothers, the children, what happened to those children? But the positive about this was bringing the community together, and we did. What I really enjoyed was meeting so many people from so many different places and hearing what they had to say. We worked together without politics and with a common goal. And for that, I'm ever grateful. There are some very special people that I would like to speak about later on, but I think I've had enough to say for the moment.
You're wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Lynn, why don't you pick it up? You had another thing to say, maybe was it at the airport? You wanted to make a point. Well, for these personal remembrances is exactly what I was hoping to capture. I do, though, want to say, well, these women and countless like them were working day and night. Our organizations as well were working to capture the attention and the support of the United States government. Let me just go. Those Armenian Assembly and the Armenian Relief Society of the ARF were working together most times, sometimes individually, but most times together, in lobbying Congress, and worked with great success. They got two appropriations totaling $10 million to be sent over to a Soviet republic. To think of that during those last stages of the Cold War. Yet, despite the $10 million that the government gave, the Armenian, the civilian community raised $40 million. So you can imagine sort of the support that both government and people were giving to respond to this crisis. Vice President Bush, then soon to become President Bush, sent his son in late December, sent his son Jack and his grandson George to Armenia on one of the first transport planes to show America's support and backing for the Armenians in their crisis, in their time of need. The Assembly established, both the Assembly and the ARS, the Relief Society, both established offices in Yerevan that could facilitate the flow of U.S. aid to the victims. The Assembly started a factory in Gyumri that employed 70 people, and they they made furniture for 42,000 people. They turned out furniture for 42,000 people. The Armenian Relief Society of North America built more than 150 homes in the region that had the devastation and destruction in. The people had no trust at that point in the Soviet system. They were looking for aid, assistance, and the Armenians, the Armenian diaspora, and the American government was there to offer that hand. Understand, this was only this tragedy was only a 6.9 Richter scale earthquake. Recently, there was a 7.0 in a rather urban area of Alaska. There wasn't a single soul who died because of the construction of the houses. During the Soviet system, especially during the 1950 until the late 80s, in Leninyakan and Spitak, 8-story buildings were being constructed. Fine buildings, except very little concrete was holding the beams together, and as a result, it toppled like dominoes. This was a joint effort of us, you, and the government. And for me personally, that needed to be remembered. When I went to Yerevan this last summer, and I spoke in Yerevan to the students about this, and I learned that there had never been a recognition in Yerevan for this support that the Armenians had given, Armenians in the diaspora had given. And I thought, right then I said, I'm going to do something to thank you for saving our country. Lastly, Caroline, you have one more thing to say?
Well, as you know, I could talk on the subject for 2 hours, but I won't. But I did want to make a couple of points clear. When all this stuff started coming in, the milk fund, the clothing, there had to be a way to get it there. And this was a big problem. And what happened was, thanks to George Kavarian, we got a hangar, an old TWA hangar at the airport in that freight area. Okay, that's great, we got that. Now, how do we get the stuff there? People organized, Ted Kennedy got the National Guard. We had a company of National Guardsmen every day who went out in various places and collected donations. At night, they would call Robert, George's nephew, give him the list of what they had collected, and he would give them the list of where they had to go the next day to collect. All that stuff was connected. Nancy Gulissarian managed the logistics of all that stuff that was coming in, being delivered, the trucks, you couldn't just drive to the airport and get into the freight area. There had to be a permission granted, and it was set up with Nancy. She was the key person. She did an outstanding job, and it was a tough one. Then there was the first trip to Armenia. Sohonia, the infamous arms dealer, and now what's gone on, donated his plane for us. The first time was a donation. The second time it was $75,000. The first time and the second time, neither time did we know that the plane did not meet FAA requirements that were waived. And George put me on that plane with Dick Agavabian, Dr. Agavabian from Worcester, the late Dr. Agavabian, and the two of us flew with 90,000 pounds of medical supplies, equipment, water, blankets, clothing, medicine. We got to get him on, and we had no idea what we were going to do once we got there. That's another story. Then, the next part, we had to get out of Logan Airport. They didn't want us anymore. We started storing the stuff in everybody's garage. People like Steve Carrion were collecting supplies from hospitals, Mother's Funds. We were doing layups. Dr. Betty Gregory and a good friend, have organized all of the church women to make layups for mothers, because when I was there, I saw these women were having babies and they had nothing, absolutely nothing to give to these little ones. So we got layups, thousands of them. We did first aid kits, et cetera, et cetera. Now what do we do with this? So thanks to John Simorian. John put all this stuff, when we told him, John, we need another truck, and would truck it down gratis to New Jersey, to an Air Force base, U.S. Air Force base, and the U.S. government shipped these goods out for several years until the UAF, the United Armenian Fund, and Kirk Reporter got going. All of those logistics required time, effort, and management. And on the other side, everyone needed to have oversight. You had to be on the ground to make sure that what you sent went to where it belonged and that it was used in the right way. Even then, it was difficult. So I think it was a massive effort. The amazing thing is it did not go on just for a week or a month or 2 months. It went on for years that way, and people stayed with it. And I think we all should be feeling very happy about it. And in Armenia, they do recognize that effort, which I've been thanked many, many times. I'm sure you have in my many trips. And as I remember, there have been some celebrations.
References. Yeah, just a last note.
I just wanted to say, and the effort isn't over. When Elizabeth and I met in Chicago, I had never met her when we were appointed co-chairs of this committee for the AMAA. We met in Chicago because she came from Los Angeles and I came from Boston. And we said, on our way home to the airport, we both went in a taxi together to get back to our own homes. She in LA, I in Boston. And we said, Elizabeth, they've asked us to do this. How long do you suppose we will be doing this for? And I said, oh, Elizabeth, it's got to be at least 20 years so that these children who are left orphans have been taken care of by the organization, educated, and can manage on their own. She said, okay, 20 years we can do, because neither one of us is that young at that point, although much younger than I am now. This is 30 years later. And 30 years later, we're still there. At AMAA, we are much more sophisticated in the way we distribute help. We have the help, at the beginning, just as you say, it was a scramble. How do we get, we had some boots on the ground because l'Espoir pour l'Arménie from France was on the ground almost simultaneously with us. And René Desgognon, a pastor from France, was helping. And we had a field director there. So within 6 months, we were beautifully organized so that we could identify who the families were that needed help, how we could, and every other month, we had food stuff, but flour that went from here to there, dried milk, milk from the milk fund, because the milk fund didn't have a way to get its milk to Armenia. Elaine said to me one day in desperation, I've got all this money, I've got all this formula, I don't know, nobody wants to get it over there. I said, let me see what I can do with AMAA. I called Mrs. Jambazian, he said, I don't know her from a hole in the wall. I said, I do, and they're a good organization, and they're doing wonderful work. I vouch for her. So he said, okay, we'll take that too. In a time when it was difficult to get stuff sent. So there was tremendous cooperation. 30 years later, I'm still at it. I'm still raising funds in Boston. My Elizabeth in the West Coast is just doing marvelous. We've raised millions of dollars, and it's all continuing work. And I have a cousin here by the name of Sona, who helped me raise funds. Sona Armenian. Oh, I think it was our third big luncheon. She was there with her pals from the Catholic Church and St. James and St. Stephen's, and this is how we are doing it. We continue to do it, and thanks to all of you, the work continues, and it will. We're still in tough shape.
I think I'd like to end this portion of it. I want to call Michelle's husband up here, John, to have a bit of one-on-one, but I think you all understand why I wanted these women to tell their stories. It's just extraordinary. So, this is what got me into this. In 1952, a bit younger than John, my father, Anusharan Kirchin, loved all sports, took me to a Watertown Belmont football game at Victory Field. And I remember it to the day of watching a man walk off, one of the players walk off into the mist, having scored a touchdown that day. And but the helmet under his arm, and it was my picture. It has always been my picture. Forget Ted Williams, forget Tom Brady, maybe Bill Russell. But it's always been the picture, for me, of a hero walking off the field. And so when I got the call from the chairman of the AMAA, the Armenian Missionary Association of America, that he would like me to tell this story that John Samorian had in him about a secret effort to bring supplies to the Armenian victims directly after the earthquake, I jumped at it, mostly because I just wanted to talk to John about his athletic exploits. But he's the toughest interview I've had in this whole thing. It's so hard to get him to emote on it. But John, tell us about what happened after the meeting that Michelle had at Carol Ann's home. You were in the car with her and she looked at you, and what did she ask you to do?
Well, before I do that, I just want to say that there is no one I know of that can embellish a story as well as you. Carol Ann's house. Michelle looked at me as we were driving home, and she said, honey, we have to do something. We have to do something. And you know, that got translated later, that they took out the honey and it said John, right? They don't make it too personal, I guess, whatever. So I said, well, what do you have in mind? What on earth could we do? And she said, call your good friend Vern Laux. And I looked at her almost in disbelief. I said, honey, you know, I haven't seen Vern Laux since 1956. And when I did see it, just so you know who Vern Laux is the chairman, CEO of Baxter Laboratories at that time. We're talking about 88, 89. And he was the chairman. And he and I had played football against each other for 4 years. And he was an end. He was a real big guy, like 6'4", about 220, all muscle, tough as nails. And you can see how big I am. I'm not, you know, I'm a little guy. But it just so happened that my assignment all the time was, when I was on defense, was to cover him. And his assignment when he was on defense was to sack me. And he was much more successful at it than I was, let me tell you. I used to kid him, like, when I finally did meet him many, many years later, I told him the reason why he was an All-American was because of me. Anyway, so I did call. I called Vern the next morning. And again, we hadn't seen each other since 1956. However, we had been communicating with one another by mail. And the way that happened was, about 25 years after we graduated, he was appointed the president and CEO of Baxter Laboratories, which I read about in the New York Times business page. And so I sent him a note, and I, you know, just congratulated him on that. And he sent me a note back and said, thanks so much, and do you ever get to Chicago? And if you do, let's have dinner. And I said, okay, terrific. And I used to go to Chicago, Michelle and I used to go to Chicago 2, 3, 4 times a year. And each time we'd go, I'd call Vern and speak to his secretary, and well, I'm sorry, Mr. Samorian, but Mr. Laux is out of town. He's in, you know, where? He's in Europe, he's in Asia, someplace. Because, you know, Baxter is a huge, huge company. Over the years, Michelle and I kept calling, and when we'd get to our hotel, there'd always be a box of chocolates or a bottle of wine or flowers or whatever that his secretary would always send to us. We never saw him. Never spoke to him, never saw him. So now I call him. This is the first time we're going to have a voice communication. I call him that morning, around 9 o'clock in the morning, and to my surprise, he picks up the phone. And he said, John, how are you? Like, you know, we're all buddies. And I said, terrific, Vern. Listen, I want to ask you something after we go through the small talk. I need to ask you if there's something you could do. I don't know if you know, but there was an earthquake in Armenia. He said, oh yeah, I saw it on TV. He said, it's interesting you say that because I just got through our morning meeting. They had a, you know, Monday morning meeting, a management meeting like they always had. And he said, I brought that up to my crew, all my execs, and I said, we need to do something for these people. And I thought to myself, wow, what a coincidence, you know, that happened. So I said, well, Vern, what can you do? And he said, well, listen, in an earthquake, people get crushed, and they need dialysis machines. So I have a gentleman on my staff who's a former U.S. Air Force general, and he also negotiated in the SALT I talks with the Russians. So he said, I know Armenia is Soviet, and I know you need some contact with the Russians. He said, I'm going to put him on this case because he knows the Russians well, and he'll call you. I said, Vern, that is so terrific. Thank you. Well, within an hour, General Don Johnson called me. I was absolutely flabbergasted. He called and he said, John, after we go through the small talk again, he said, hey, look, here's what I need. I need 3 planes, and I need visas for 60 people. And I said to him, General, Vern told me you're an Air Force, retired Air Force general. You're asking me for 3 planes? He said, yes. He said, because this is not a military operation. This is a State Department operation. This is a political operation. Who do you know that's a politician? I said, well, the only guy I know, really know, I know Ted Kennedy. He said, none better. That's the guy to call. So I picked up the phone and I called Ted.
First,
Yeah.
give us an understanding, why would you have known Ted Kennedy?
Well, Ted and I played football together at Harvard, and he was an end, and I was a halfback at that time, and so we were on the same side of the line, and we used to block together and missed a lot of blocks together and get chewed out together, and so we built a bond, I guess, out of all the chewing outs, feeling sorry for one another. But and it was only. Ted and I were only in school together and played together for only 1 year because, you know, he had a little problem. He left school, then he came back. When he came back, it was the year I played with him. But, you know, sometimes you don't know why chemistry happens, but it just happened, and we just, you know, kind of hit it off. And yeah, so I picked up the phone and called him. And frankly, I will tell you this, and he knew it. Was that I've never voted for a Democrat in my life. I'm of the other party persuasion, but I said, you know, I've never voted for a Democrat in my life, with one exception, Ted. One exception. I always voted for him. I'm just, you know, as a side, I never told you this was going, and I don't want to keep people too long. So how much time?
You're doing fine, you're doing fine.
All right. When Ted decided, you know, when John Kennedy decided to run for president, he was a senator, as a young man from Massachusetts. So he had to give up his Senate seat to run for president. Actually, if he won, he would give up his Senate seat. So he won. So he gave up his Senate seat. Well, who's the logical choice? You know, pass it down to the family, right? So they, you know, give it to Ted. Well, we didn't know that. Nobody knew that at the time. But Ted called a bunch of us that had played ball with him and said, please meet me at the State House here in Boston. And so, you know, a bunch of us, when I say a bunch, like about 25, 30 guys from my football team, went to the State House. And we were gathering around talking to each other and saying, what's up? What do you think? What's Ted going to be talking about? And one of the guys said, you know, I think he's going to say he's running for the Senate. He wants our support. And we looked at each other and said, wow, you really think so? Yeah. And in walks Ted, and he says, hey guys, I just want to let you know, I'm going to run for the Senate, and I need your support. I don't care what party you belong to. I want your support, okay? We said, okay, you got it. You got it. So
you asked him?
Yeah.
You asked him to get a plane? Or
I called Ted and I said to him, I said, this is going to be a crazy request here. But I need 3 planes, and I need visas for 60 people, and they're going to Soviet Armenia. Can you help me out? He said, where do you want the planes? And I said, you know what? I'll tell you what. Why don't you have one of your people on your staff? I'll give you a number to call. They can call Baxter, and why don't they work out the details with General Johnson, and they'll get it all figured out. Okay? He said, okay. So they sent the planes in, they loaded them up like dialysis machines and medical.
$2 million worth of dialysis equipment and probably about a dozen technicians, doctors, staff loaded onto a plane. And where does the plane land? Andrews Air Force Base.
No, not that one.
That's not the first one?
That's the second one.
Okay, the second one. Andrews Air Force Base, the most protected, secure military facility that we have in America. And Teddy Kennedy has gotten to help us to get this supplies, to get this $2 million worth of dialysis equipment to Armenia.
Yeah, that was the second call.
That's the second.
Yeah, when I called him the second time, I told him that the general had arranged to have have Soviet planes land at Andrews. Are you kidding me? You're gonna have Russian, this is the Cold War, right? We were in the Cold War back then. And he said, yeah, he said, we're gonna have land the Russian planes, but I need permit to do it. So call Senator Kennedy and get me the permits to land 3 Russian planes. And because I'm gonna send truckloads of medical supplies to Andrews from our North Carolina facility, and we'll load it up. So the planes came in, they had permits, they landed. There were Russian military on those planes, American military working with them, loading these planes.
Yep, I was able to reach one of the technicians, a couple of the technicians who were on the plane, Baxter technicians, and one of them said, you know, he said, I knew there was going to be a Russian plane that was landing in Andrews. This was something extraordinary. So I left my barracks and watched it land and watched it taxi over to us. And it took a minute or two, so I was wandering around. And what do I see? A whole squad dressed totally in black of American military commandos coming, closing in on the plane. And he said to them, you know, they're there to take the supplies to Armenia. He said, we just want to make sure everybody who gets off the plane gets back on the plane. So, I mean, this is really a secretive operation that John, with the one Democrat he ever voted for, was able to get carried out. But he had one more request of you.
What was that?
Don't tell the Globe.
Oh, don't tell the Globe. Don't tell this guy. Yeah, Ted Kennedy said to me in the beginning, frankly, he said, listen, I don't want to see this in the papers. I don't want to ever see it anywhere. I don't want to hear it on the news, okay? You've got to keep this secret. So we kept it secret until he died, and then felt free to tell the story.
Well, when I heard the story, took my notes, I said, John, I've got to get this confirmed. I went to my contacts, sources within Kennedy's operation. Oh yeah, we heard something about there was something at Logan Airport also he was able to do. And I said, I've got to get this confirmed from a better source than you know, they don't really have it exact. And he said, well, I only told a couple of other people. I said, who'd you tell? He said, Bobby Caprelli. So Bobby Caprelli, I called Bobby in the next hour, and I said, Bob, can you confirm this? He says, I've known this for 2 decades. I've known this story. So John Snorri may not have told the Globe, but he did tell his great friend on the 1952-53 Watertown High School football team. Those are the best secrets. Well, I think we've...
Can I say one other thing?
Sure.
I don't know if I ever told you.
Oh.
I just wanted to conclude about Vern Lux and what a terrific guy he is. So after this mission was complete, he kept his people in Yerevan, in Armenia, for 9 months. 9 months, okay? 60 people, 9 months. He brought them all back. When he brought them back to Chicago, to headquarters there, he called me up and he said, John, I need you to do something for me. I said, what? He said, I want you to come to a dinner. He said, I'm having a dinner for the 60 people, and I want you and your wife there. I'll have my plane pick you up. You tell me what airport you want to pick up from. I said, Vern, thank you so much. I know how to get to Chicago. The only thing I need is, if you want to pick me up at the Chicago airport, because I don't know where your Baxter Lab is. So we did, and we went. And what he did was, he had the 60 people there at dinner. We all met them. And interestingly, all those people, including his secretary, thought that Vern Lux and me were like this. Real buddies, okay? Now, we hadn't seen each other since 1956, last time. Right? We bumped heads in 1956. But when he walked into the room, the first time I saw him was in 56, I knew who he was. He knew who I was. But I knew who he was, because he's the tallest guy in the room. Right? He was huge. And, you know, we had a nice little get-together, and it was a wonderful evening. And what he gave everybody, this is what I wanted you to know, what he gave everyone was a globe, a black globe. And on the globe is a gold star where Armenia is. So I have that on my desk at home, and everyone that was there got that black globe, star, gold star for Armenia.
And the one last thing, I called Vernon Louch, I was able to find him, and I called him up and I told him who I was and the story I had learned from John, and he told me about, from his side of it, what he had done. And then he said, you know, I would love to get back to a Harvard-Yale football game, and John was going to arrange it, but he wasn't well enough this November to do this. But he said, that mission, what I did, what we did, was the most important thing that I had ever done in my life. That I responded to the need of your people is one thing, but that I responded to the call out by my longtime adversary at the Harvard football game, George Samorian. That's what made it extra special. And you can see why I followed this story to the end, and I hope you enjoyed the evening. Thank you very much.
We have a question.
Okay, a few questions. Maybe ask the best. Again, I have copies of the AMA magazine back there. Carol Ann said it was a page turner. That's all I never need. It was a great article.
Okay, so the 60 people got their visas because of the State Department, but how about the organizations, the Armenian organizations? How would the fact that Armenia was part of the Soviet Union, it was still closed?
Yep.
Granted, it was a natural disaster, but the fact that it was a Soviet Union, I mean, how was that arranged that immediately you guys...
You know, I tell you how it was arranged. Kennedy did some work in getting the State Department to stay open to get those visas on Saturday. But somehow, I'm not sure who the person was. I know the person on Kennedy's staff who worked with health, called Bernard Lom, L-O-W-N, and he had opened up already a relationship with the Soviet scientist health minister, the Soviet health minister. And he had said, we're bringing over dialysis equipment, $2 million worth of dialysis equipment, but we need to get access to the Soviet Union. So I think it was that relationship between Chazov and Dr. Lam that made them so welcome in Yerevan. I think they first landed in Moscow, and then they got to Yerevan.
And then do you think that this disaster and the fact that all these foreigners all of a sudden came into the Soviet Union to help Armenia sort of hastened the independence?
You know, that's the reporter in me stretching it to the point of, I think, credibility.
Can I come up? Okay.
Thank you.
Actually,
We're not going to get into political debate. We're here to celebrate what we did as a
this is
community.
an interesting point that the assembly being based in Washington understood that the third in command at the Russian embassy was in fact an Armenian. And they had been in communication with him.
Right.
And they were able, that was, I think, the first time that the Soviet Union had ever allowed aid to come through. Yeah.
Wasn't Gorbachev's economist early on in Armenian?
Yeah, I know that connection at the Russian embassy was.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very interesting to learn a lot tonight, I think. I was 11-year-old when this happened. I was in Yerevan.
You were.
So I was in Armenia, Yerevan, when this whole thing happened. So it's very interesting to hear how things worked out from this side.
Right.
But the specific question I had is, so Soviet authorities had their own rescue program going on. Right? So,
Rescue program.
That's right. They have their own aid. Do you guys coordinate with them? I mean, clearly you have to coordinate for visas, for transportation.
Right.
But as far as aid is concerned, as far as things are concerned, do you work with them? How did it all work out?
You know, I don't think, in fact, I think there was criticism of the Soviet military in Leningrad of not responding quickly enough, because they did have some equipment that could have cleared some of the rubble. I'm not sure that there could have been a massive recovery effort, because it has to take place within 48 hours. There was no civil defense program in, whether it was in Yerevan, it certainly wasn't in those two cities, that would have responded immediately to such a crisis.
The way I was mentioning that there were essentially no earthquake rescue professionals.
There was none.
That only existed was created after the fact. My father was working as a volunteer for 1 week in Spitak. And he said essentially most of the people were volunteers, and it was like everything was...
Right. I think French sent some people, some rescue people,
Italians.
and Italians as well. But
essentially you were working completely separate from the Soviets. Like they were doing...
Yes, right. Gorbachev, I think, has let the doors open. You know, the media, the coverage from here was incredible. CNN had started, CNN was there, ABC, the networks were there, and the Post and the Times sent the two best foreign journalists, Bill Keller and David Remnick, there, and the coverage was inspiring. But I think it was because Gorbachev wanted to show that they were trying to do as much as they can, but also undercut the Soviet rule. He knew that it was over.
Right. If just as one last comment, I would say that people ask about how did this affect the independence movement.
Please.
I think the outpouring of help, which was overwhelming on the Armenian side, was definitely played the role of putting people back on their feet, essentially. Having the sense that we're gonna overcome.
Thank you.
And like all the help that came was. I remember as a kid, it was completely overwhelming the amount of help that came from here, from the diaspora.
Don't look at me, look at them.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Next.
Regarding the visas, there were no visa requirements for the first couple of months. You could just go in. What happened to Dick and I, when we got there, we were definitely concerned about how we were on a transport plane. We were traveling cargo. And we get there, we've got 3 pilots, I'm sure, 2 pilots and a mechanic, and I'm sure 1 or 2 of them were CIA. Because I don't remember how they were snapping shots of various things as we came through. But we got there and we were told to just hand over our passports. And Dick and I waited in the plane in the cold for about 2 hours while these guys with their machine guns and everything came. We had no idea. I mean, they could have taken us to jail. And
Did you fly directly to Yerevan or to Moscow?
that was in Yerevan. No, we flew directly to Yerevan. We flew from Boston to
Ireland.
No, Ireland or Greenland. Greenland, I think. We stopped in a snowstorm. And then from Greenland, we're refueling, and from Greenland directly to Yerevan. The flights to Moscow came later. But those humanitarian flights all went directly to Yerevan. And then they came and they said, okay, you can just come in.
Right.
We stood there, they just gave us our passport back. And this is true for all the humanitarian workers who were there. And when we landed on that airfield, we've never seen anything like it. And I don't think you ever will again, because it was filled with planes from all over the world.
Right. The outpouring, more than 100 countries.
Right. And there was cargo everywhere. And of course, they had said to me, you gotta send these pallets back.
Right.
So all I worried about was the pallets. Well, of course, they never got that, because we don't know what happened to the plane. But the problem was that now Armenia has medicine from all over the world in It was a huge, huge problem, and unfortunately, a lot of it went to waste. A lot of it didn't, but a lot of it didn't.
On that, just this last point, I was interested to know what happened to the Baxter healthcare dialysis equipment. What they had there, just was in Armenia at the time of the earthquake, was totally insufficient. So they were rushed in and set up as quickly as they could, and they did save many lives. But the equipment is still there in the hospitals, still being used by the Armenian healthcare system in the 2 hospitals where they were placed. So they had enduring service for us. Again, listen, thank you very much for coming.
Mark, would you mind if I thank everybody on behalf of First Armenian Church for coming? And there are some refreshments available. I know it's late, people want to leave, but please grab a cookie on your way out. There's coffee, there's drinks.
Very good, very good.